been involved in setting up early childhood centers in India. Monita Sen joined the IB office in Singapore in 2012, where she now provides support to schools moving through the authorization process to become IB World Schools. Monita is passionate about working with early years educators in the PYP to share stories of good practice across contexts, and has developed and led workshops for many educators over the past 10 years. Monita holds a master's degree in education and English literature and is currently undertaking a doctor in education with the University of Bath. Her areas of interest and research include anything to do with early childhood, agency, creativity, and transdisciplinary approaches to learning. So why the interesting education background and experience that she has. So before we start, let's welcome also our lecturers here. Rosa Smoko, good morning. Ibu Mel, we have Ibu Astri.
Hello,
And
everyone.
Pak Warno, Pak Freddy are not here yet. Okay, and all the students. So let us learn something from today's webinar. And please, at the end of the presentation, I would like you to ask questions. So we will have 40-minute presentation. After that, 10 minutes for question and answer session, and we'll have the closing after that. Okay. So thank you very much, and let us welcome Monita. Monita.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Lovely to be here with you all today. I'm just going to share my screen so that you can see my presentation slides. And give me a second. Okay, are you able to see that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yes.
we can see it clearly. Okay.
All right. Okay, well, let's get started. So I first have to say that don't be surprised if my cat interrupts because currently I'm working from home and I have a Siamese cat and she loves Zoom. So whenever I'm on a Zoom meeting, she loves to come and say hello. So it's quite
That's
distracting sometimes. So I'm telling you now, I'm apologizing in advance in case she Zoom bombs us.
Okay, no problem, please. No problem.
I hope you all like cats.
We do.
Great. So the topic today that I'm going to talk about, I've called it the learning ecology. And really, I'm going to talk about something called transdisciplinary learning. So I'll explain a little what I mean more by that. But when you first look at the words, the learning ecology, I wonder what you're thinking. Maybe you're thinking of some biology lessons long ago when you learned about ecosystems. So why I've chosen to call this presentation Learning Ecology is really, for me, learning is connected to so many other things, and transdisciplinary learning is all about connections. So if you think about a learner, they're in an ecosystem of various networks, right? So there's their learning process, their different contexts, their families, their environments, their cultures, also the resources around them and the opportunities that they have as a learner. So learners are not in isolation, right? They are in a part of a learning ecology and many things affect them. And transdisciplinary learning, that's a long word and it's very difficult to spell. I always get confused by it. But transdisciplinary learning is an approach to learning that supports this. So this is something that's also very much aligned with the IB programs. And as you would have seen, I work with the IB, particularly with the IB program. I started as a teacher. I actually began as a Montessori teacher in 1999, and then I moved into IB. So I've had a very long relationship, if you like, with the IB, and it really resonates with me because I feel that it aligns with my worldviews. So as teachers, and all of you are, becoming in the process of becoming teachers, which is a very, very exciting and wonderful thing. I'm very happy for you. You will have your own personal beliefs and your values about teaching. And when you find something that resonates with you, you'll feel like, yeah, this makes sense to me. I like this. And those things will change over time. So I had found as a young teacher, when I first came into contact with the primary years program and this whole idea of transdisciplinary learning, I had found it very interesting because it resonated for me with the idea that education is a powerful tool, but it's always embedded with some values and things that we hold important. And really, we become educators because we want to contribute to the world, right? Socially, we want to support children. We want to make a difference in not only individual children's lives, but if possible, in the world as well. We believe that education is a cause. So that's probably why some of you decided to become teachers. And hopefully today, some of the things you hear might resonate with you. You might not be working with IB programs ever, but really IB programs have evolved out of good practice and good philosophy. So there are many things that you can draw and connect with regardless of where you're going and what role you're going to be doing. So I first of all wanted to say congratulations to you all for taking on this noble job of becoming a teacher. It really is something that I think it's more than a job, it's more like a calling. So I've got here on the screen the IB mission statement because some of the things that I'm talking about with this transdisciplinarity connect very well to the IB's goal of making the world a better place and making it a more peaceful world through intercultural understanding. So specifically, let's start with some good teaching practice. We always, when we're working with our students, we like to tell them where we're going because we're going on an inquiry, a journey today. And there are three key questions that hopefully this presentation in short 40 minutes will begin to answer. I hope at the end of this presentation, you have more questions because then that I feel like my job is done here. So normally I would start by explaining what transdisciplinary learning is, but if you've heard of someone called Simon Sinek, he always says start with the why because that really addresses our values and it gives us the context. So we're going to start with why and give you a little bit of a big picture about why this thing called transdisciplinary or this integrated approach to learning is something that is quite valuable at this time. Then we'll look at the what a little bit and look at the technicalities of how that might work. And the last one is more of a how, because it's the relationship between teachers collaborating and working together and this approach to learning. So those are the three questions that hopefully at the end of this presentation, you might know a little bit more. Right now, you just be wondering perhaps, what is this word all about? So to start, I've got something that I like to call a provocation, and I came across this in some research recently. This word called, it's a concept called liquid modernity. There was a philosopher, Zygmunt Bauman, in 1999. He wrote a book about this concept. And I feel this is really very relevant for today, because particularly in the case of our current world situation facing a pandemic. And he talks about a liquid. You know what a liquid is like. You study the properties of a liquid. It takes on the structure of whatever, the form of whatever container you put it in. It's very fluid, it's adaptable. So he says that the world that we're living in has become liquid, this modern world. There are so many dimensions. You know, there's economic, things are changing, socially, things are changing. The map of the world continues to change, and that often causes a lot of conflicts with people. The environment, technology is changing, and education is also changing. Now more than ever, most of the schools that I work with have all gone online or have some kind of blended learning, and you're, I'm sure, also seeing the same thing happen. So he said that education has become liquid, and we need to be liquid in our response to education as well. So as things keep changing, we need to keep adapting and taking the shape to best meet the needs of the children. So I want you to just kind of hold that idea with you because I really like that idea of being liquid. Another piece of research that I found interesting was a study done by some consultants, Price Waterhouse Cooper. They do a lot of research about the world of work. And they did this particular piece of research, this paper, which you can find if you follow this QR code or at this link. There's also a quiz there where you can see which of the 4 worlds of work do you think you would most like to live in. So they talk about a blue world, a red world, a green world, and a yellow world. And each of these worlds really has different values embedded in them. And they're saying the future of work will be any of these four or all of these four things. Because in one aspect, the blue world is about big companies, it's about capitalism, large organizations becoming bigger and bigger, and that individualism, that idea of individualism and personalization growing. We can already see a lot of that with corporations in the world today. Then they talk about a red world, and the red world is more about innovation. And we're also seeing that how innovation has become such a commodity nowadays. So individuals and organizations are really trying to innovate and create the best product as fast as possible to meet their markets. And particularly now in a digital setting, we're finding that true. So the red world is all about innovation. In the green world, it's very much about the environment, as you can imagine from the green aspect. So saying that things like taking care and having an environmental agenda to save the planet is going to be an essential part of the way companies work, and that's going to be prioritized and is going to be something that's mandatory as well. And finally, with the yellow world, they talk about a society where humans come first. And really, it's about crowdfunding. Oh, here's my cat. Hello. She wants to live in the yellow world. Yes, so the idea of this future being so uncertain basically is going to be categorized by certain things. So we know the future is going to have large technological breakthroughs. There are going to be demographic shifts. There's rapid urbanization. We're seeing that already. Shifts in the global economy. Now, I think that's a very relevant one for us, given the pandemic that we're facing. Oops. She's just knocked everything off my desk and changed the slide. Thank you, Kat. So given these are the various indications for the future, and we're living in a time of great change, what does this really mean for us, and what does this mean for education? Of course, education is not just about preparing students for work, right? I mean, it's a very important part. Work is very much part of our lives, and we need that to become, economically stable. But there's also the aspect of our own environment and our humanity and our existence, which is threatened by something called wicked problems or situations. I don't know if you've ever heard of this term, a wicked problem. So a wicked problem is something that doesn't necessarily have a solution. It's something that constantly keeps changing. It can be defined as a problem that is difficult or impossible to solve because of incomplete, contradictory, or changing requirements that are often difficult to recognize. So things like global warming, a shortage of food on the world, even things like global pandemics. These are complex and what we refer to as wicked problems. You may have also heard of this term, we're living in a VUCA, or we're preparing for a VUCA future, which means that the future is volatile. They're prone to changes. It's uncertain, it's complex, and it's ambiguous. So these things, not just these are connected to that idea of things changing in the future, but also the challenges. So when we look at these, the big question is how do we prepare the students that we're working with right now to be able to adjust and to be able to work in these worlds that are constantly changing, and to be able to address these challenges that threaten our existence as humanity on this planet. So this is a little bit this is the context. So why? So there's been some research done about if you have a wicked problem, then you need a wicked solution or systemic thinking. So systemic thinking means thinking across systems. It's a very broad way of approaching recognizing the connectivity of everything that we do. And in their work, Williams and Hoff in 2014, they came up with a sort of, if you like, a framework or some key important factors for the structure of a wicked solution. So there obviously isn't one simple solution, but they said there are three key elements, and one is interrelationships. That has to do with the way things are connected, the implications, so cause and effect, and encourages questioning of who else is affected by this, what are the different implications of this. So it can be to do with things, people, ideas, and resources. The other aspect they talk about is perspectives. And there is a systems thinker, C. West Churchman. He famously says, the system approach begins when you first see the world through the eyes of another. So really, this is talking about empathy. Very often when we look at a problem, we're looking at it from a single perspective. So wicked solutions require looking at things systemically and looking from them from the position of multiple perspectives. The third element they talk about is boundaries, which is quite an interesting one. So basically, they say that our understanding of a situation will always be limited. There's no such thing as no boundaries. Which is interesting when we talk about transcending boundaries or going above them. But really, boundaries about what is included and what is not included. So in a subject, in a school decision, it could be something like what is included in the curriculum and what is not. But in a global issue, when we're solving, like when we're thinking about the pandemic, it's about what information is included, whose values are included. So they talk about these three ideas. And I think for us in education, it's important to think about, okay, if this is the approach on a large scale global level to address wicked problems by creating wicked solutions, how can education support this kind of approach? And what is it that we can do, with our 3-year-olds and our 5-year-olds that really helps them to get into this mindset? In this next section, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the research that supports this. And really, when we're talking about learning environments, we're talking about authentic learning. And you might hear a lot of this as you're going through your own preparation to become a teacher. We talk a lot about real world settings or authentic learning. So how do we define this authentic learning? Well, Rules 2006 definition, he says that authentic learning includes real world problems that engage learners. So something that is significant, making education really mirror what children are going to be doing and facing in their real lives. It also talks about inquiry. So inquiry-based learning, which is based on, a social constructivism ontology and epistemology, so that really that learners construct their meaning. And this includes those higher order thinking skills, things like, critical thinking, application, and creativity. It also highlights discussions and collaborations in the community of learners. So the community of learners includes parents, students, teachers. So a heightened level of collaboration is what is required for this authenticity of learning to happen so that multiple perspectives can be brought into the design. And last, he talks about empowering, but I've changed that a little to enabling student voice and ownership through their choice. And this is this whole concept of learner agency or agency, which you might have come across. It's a very vast, I think, a collection of concepts, agency, and it's quite complex. So if you are interested, that I would encourage you to look into. But agency is ultimately about enabling students, and agency is the opposite of being helpless. So we really want students who are able to make their own decisions and make informed choices and feel that they have the personal power to do that. And all of these elements come together quite well in what we call a transdisciplinary approach to learning. And this is quite well supported by research. So if you track the history of integrated learning, you can trace it back to the progressive education movement. On one hand with Dewey, which really was the interdisciplinary student-centered approach, and also the work of Nicolescu, who worked more, and even Piaget, Piaget was actually the first person to use this word transdisciplinary learning. So that was then picked up by Nicolescu, and it was very much at a higher level, adults working together. And so this has found its way down into curriculum now. And one of the criticisms that really led to the inclusion of this integrated curriculum was that isolated disciplines really are removed from the reality of everyday life. We do not go about our lives saying, this is mathematics. You don't wake up. If you went shopping today, you didn't say, when you picked up something, you didn't say, oh, it's heavy. Oh, that's weight. So that's mathematics. Or it's too expensive. That's mathematics. Oh, it's raining outside. That's social studies. You naturally draw from the different disciplines the information that you need to process the task that you're doing. So really, there was criticism of this isolated disciplinary focus that was happening in schools, saying that real life isn't like this and we need to present children with a more connected view of knowledge. So that was one aspect of relevance. The other was about the importance of our connectedness. You know, as borders, as the world became flatter, that we heard from Thomas Friedman in his famous book, The World is Flat, connections became more and more evident and apparent. So these connections being important for students to transfer their knowledge also across different areas of learning. Inquiry-based pedagogies fit really well with this because, as I said earlier, they are about the social constructivism idea and the idea that learner is at the center and that their own personal experience have an impact on what you're learning. Just like for you as teachers, your own experiences up to this point and your own childhood experiences, your own schooling experiences, very much if you like, lay the foundation for how you see education. So sometimes some of those things need to be challenged because the world is changing. So often parents also find this difficult because they say, oh, but it wasn't like this in my day in school. And we're trying to say, well, that was a very different world and we need a different kind of education now. So this is just some of the research that supports what we're talking about. And regardless, that research is relevant whether you're working in whatever program you're working with, but it's fundamental to the primary years program. And because many of you might not know much about the primary years program, I thought I'd just talk to you a little bit about the framework. So the IB has 4 educational programs that range for children from 3 up to 18. And right at the beginning segment of that is the primary years program, which is for 3 to 12-year-olds. And the key fundamental principles are those that run through the IB. So we have, you know, learner-centered approach to learning. We are an inquiry-based, concept-based approach to learning. Transdisciplinarity is specifically in the primary. So we have a continuum of integration. In PYP, we have transdisciplinary. In MYP, we have interdisciplinary. And in DP, it's a more disciplinary and elements of multidisciplinary as well. So I'll talk a little later about the differences between what those things are, because they are actually a little different. But in PYP, there's a commitment to agency of students. And while the subject areas are also important, we work with children through what we call the transdisciplinary theme. So it's more a unit-based approach. Through conceptual understandings. And all of this is set really in an international framework that values local and global. So in the PYP, we don't give you a set curriculum. We say, you know, draw the curriculum from what you need to. It might be your national framework, but you can adapt it into the PYP framework so that those transdisciplinary connections are supported. And really that's supported through concept-based instruction because concepts transcend, they're at a very high level in the structure of knowledge, but also through something that we call the approaches to learning, which are skills. You might connect them to the 21st century skills that we always talk about. So the skills that students need that transcend subject areas. So that's just a little bit about the PYP framework, and having a framework really does help. Otherwise, you tend to just be finding pockets of practice in transdisciplinarity, but if you have a framework, then that really guides practice for whole school transformation. You might have heard a lot of talk lately about the 4th industrial revolution. So many theorists are talking about that we're in the 4th, the cyber revolution. And we hear a lot about robots nowadays and AI. This was the stuff of Asimov's science fiction when I was growing up. I couldn't imagine it, but now we have robots in our homes. And people are beginning to worry, are robots going to take my job? A school that I used to work at, they have a robot in the classroom. They have a teacher who's a robot. So it's an interesting idea, but Graham Brown Martin, he talks about the Industrial Revolution and the relevance for curriculum now. And he says we need to de-silo the curriculum. So stop segmenting areas of the curriculum. And we need to design learning that encourages learners to make collaborative choices about real world problems. So working together across the curriculum to solve problems. And really that's what transdisciplinary learning is all about. Okay, so we've talked quite a bit about the why, and I think we can relate to the idea that our world is complex and changing, and that Helping children make connections is an important skill for them. Really, the next part is how are we going to do this? So there are different approaches to integrating curriculum, and I'm going to talk about 3 of those. And I'm going to use an illustration that is from a paper by Choi and Park in 2006. I really like this illustration. It helps me understand the difference between the different types of integration. So they use the illustration of salad, stew or soup, and a cake to describe the ways that teachers work together to design an integrated curriculum. So, for example, in a multidisciplinary approach, they call that the salad because the disciplines still are quite separate. So, for example, math and science both have the concept of measurement and skills of measurement. But in a multidisciplinary approach, you would look at these quite specifically in mathematics and in science. So, the boundaries of the subject areas, although there might be connections, the boundaries of the subject areas stay quite distinct, and teachers view themselves very much as math and science teachers, and there may be some common areas, but that isn't really the focus, so that isn't the priority. So that's the SALAD multidisciplinary approach. In an interdisciplinary approach, these boundaries begin to become a little bit blurred. So in our middle years program, for example, we have the subject areas, but we require children and teachers to plan areas of interaction, at least one in the year, so 1 or 2. So they, in one area of learning, they say, okay, you're doing this, you're looking at global warming in social studies, we're going to make some connections through graphing in mathematics or whatever. So as you can see in a soup, you can still make out a little bit. That's a bit of carrot, that's a bit of potato, but there's also areas where it's not so clear. So those boundaries begin to dissolve in an interdisciplinary model, but you can still have a clear idea of the different subject areas. So a transdisciplinary approach, which is the one that I've been talking about and is the one supported by the PYP, it starts with concepts, so it doesn't start with subjects. So for example, here you can't necessarily see where is math, where is language, but math and language skills are definitely there, but it's not the starting point. So the starting point is a central idea or a conceptual statement. For example, in this case, we might say, when interacting with natural habitats, humans make choices that have an impact on other living things. So already here, this is what we're going to look into. So we have key concepts that are driving this of causation. It's a cause and effect. Why is this happening? Change over time is happening, and responsibility is also a very key idea here. And through this, there are different ways of looking at this. So when we look at change over time, for example, we might look at climate change and we might look at these graphs. And definitely there are mathematics skills involved in this. So we're using the discipline of mathematics to enhance our understanding of the concept. The same way we might look at responsibility, and we might look at street artists, for example. There's a very famous one in Britain. I don't know if you've heard of him. He gets up to all kinds of mischievous things. His name is Banksy, and nobody really knows who he is or what he looks like. But he does a lot of political messaging in his artwork. And this one that you see here is about global warming. So he takes his responsibility and expresses it through art. So there are connections there. How can we express ourselves, and how can we express our responsibility through different media? We also obviously involved in this would be areas of social studies and science as well. So there are areas of the curriculum that are sitting behind this, but the starting point is very much understanding the concepts. So that's what we call a concept-based curriculum that is very much linked to transdisciplinary learning. And this is what we call the cake. So in the analogy of a salad, stew, and cake, the cake, you can't see the ingredients of a cake when you're eating it. You can't see the eggs in there, you can't see the flour, you can't see the sugar. You just see the whole cake and you experience the concept of the sweetness or the fruitiness of it. So that's the analogy that I think is quite good when you're thinking about planning. And the way teachers plan for these 3 are very different. So if you're going to plan for transdisciplinary learning, really you need to leave behind that identity of being a subject teacher. And that can be quite challenging for teachers, particularly if they have trained, many countries train teachers to be specialized in their subjects. So we're very attached to our subjects, right? Also, STEAM and STEM education, you might be familiar with that. That's something that's very popular right now. And STEAM generally is a push towards integration. While its history is a little bit different, it came from a different place, and it did come from a place where science and mathematics was perhaps more prioritized. But it has developed over time as the voices of the different subjects and disciplines also say, you know, this is not about what is more important; it's about how they're connected. So there's almost like a graduation or an inclined plane, they call it, of from disciplinary learning to transdisciplinary. Transdisciplinary is the most challenging to implement because it requires a high level of collaboration between teachers, and it really requires a focus on that conceptual understanding. This is just an image from some work I did with teachers, a small research study that I did with teachers looking at how teachers understand this transdisciplinary learning. And teachers really feel that by nature, if something is conceptual, it will be transdisciplinary. So for them, an approach to transdisciplinary learning is something that is concept based and is inquiry based. It is something that is relevant and contextual to children, and that it enables their agency. It has learners constructing their meaning at the center, and it draws in authentic context from different disciplines. So that really resonates. It was good to see how teachers constructed understanding of transdisciplinarity was really supported about what we're seeing in the educational literature. Okay, so we've looked at what transdisciplinarity is, and we've got a little more time. Now let's think about how does it work. How do you develop transdisciplinary learning? If I'm a teacher, how do I do this? Well, really the key to this is working together in collaboration across different disciplines. And these teams, as this quote says here, they're not made. Anybody working in teams, you know, teams are made. Sorry, they're not born. You don't wake up one morning and know how to be a team, right? So some work is required for that. So for any of you looking to be, you know, perhaps in your schools that you go to, if you're looking to have a more integrated approach, some of the advice that I can provide is really looking at a model of how you collaborate. And to look at that, you first need to look at what your learning philosophy is, and what your context is, because as we know, culture eats strategy for breakfast. So you need to look at the context and your learning philosophy before you develop a collaborative model that will support integration. As I said, it takes time. So you need to look at the availability of time and the structures that allow for teachers to come together. And then really looking at teacher identity as well. So in the PYP, we talk about, you know, it's necessary for teachers who are specialists to step out of that specialist area and try to think sometimes as a generalist. So thinking of those concepts and thinking, how do we build in the different subject areas to this concept? How do we build in the students' prior knowledge? Even more now, I think families, because students are with remote learning have been learning at home. The classroom has been the home environment, so those boundaries are becoming more fluid. So looking at the amount of time that you have and the way that teachers plan together, and the way that they start their planning. So if you start with the subjects, if you say, okay, I want to see how maths will fit into this, then you're really starting from a subject perspective. But if you start from the concept and you work back out towards, and then later on connect your different subject areas, then you're likely to have a much more transdisciplinary approach. So really it's about, for you guys, it's about asking, how can I make connections to all of these various elements and subjects? In the PYP, we have a framework for planning, for collaboration that all of our schools need to adhere to. So however they plan, they need to make sure that they cover these areas. So they need to identify the concepts first up in anything, whether it's a subject-based learning, whether it's purely mathematics, or it's a transdisciplinary unit. They need to then establish learning goals so that students know clearly what they're learning and it's not a mystery to them. Then there's a designing of learning engagements, which are connected to inquiry-based learning. So making sure that there is inquiry process through that design and promoting that uncoverage and discovery. use of resources that support that. So both primary and secondary resources. So primary resources are things like people, places, going on field trips, inviting guest speakers in. These are really foundational experiences that help children inquire about the world around them. And secondary resources support that. So things like books. Textbooks also support this. In an inquiry-based approach, we don't follow a textbook, but a textbook can support an inquiry. And that idea of integration that is built in throughout, it's integrated throughout the whole process. So at every point we're asking, you know, where are students? Where do they need to go next? And helping them understand that process. We talk a lot about assessment capability in the PYP, which is really drawn from the New Zealand curriculum. That it's very much about learners knowing themselves where they are and where they need to go next, and empowering and enabling them to get there. So that idea of agency and reflection that runs throughout the whole of the planning process. And that's key with collaboration. I think the more that teachers plan in isolation, the less they will be able to reflect together. And there's a lot of research on professional learning communities and collaboration and how this can really affect and transform pedagogical practice, but also be a great source of professional development for teachers. Okay, let me move to the next slide. So when is collaboration effective? So really it's effective not just because teachers are meeting together and sitting in a room and talking about something, but it's when it's meaningful, it needs to have a clear direction, and it needs to include objectives as well for that planning team. So it needs to also be supported by leadership, and the school itself needs to provide time and structures. So in many of our PYP schools, teachers have time set every week where they meet together at least once to reflect on what has happened and to plan the emergent curriculum. And for that, everybody needs to clearly understand what their expectations are for participation as well. There needs to be really a shared ownership of that learning. And so the power equations need to be looked at as well, saying it's that everybody has a stake in designing that unit. Specialists, you know, if somebody's teaching the arts, how is that contributing? And any of the plans that are developed need to be shared and accessible to all of the teachers there. So these are just a few of the tips for collaborative planning. And I think really with the idea of transdisciplinarity, as we've seen, it's not just an approach to learning and teaching, it is a world view of how we see the world as a connected place. And it is, if you like, an approach to learning that pervades everything that you do, if this is what you believe in. So that's really all I had to say for you today. That's just a little bit of a taster or a start, and hopefully we answered some of the questions about why we're talking about this in today's age, why it's relevant, what it actually is, what it means to be transdisciplinary, and how that can be implemented through collaboration. So I think we're at time, so I'm going to open it up for some questions now from students and I think from teachers as well. I'm not saying that I have all the answers, but it'll be good to discuss and hear what you're thinking as well.
Okay, thank you very much, Monita.
Thanks.
What a great presentation. I believe everybody learns new things today. So we will start soon for the QA session. Without further ado, any questions so far from the students first? Anybody? You can turn on your microphone and then you ask questions directly, or you might write down in the group chat if you want. Boleh pakai bahasa Indonesia, kalau mau silakan, nanti saya terjemahkan. Jangan tunggu ya, waktunya jalan terus.
Jimmy, can I ask a question?
Bu Astri ya? Sure. Come on, Bu Astri.
Ms. Monita, would you please tell me more about the word agency?
Yeah, sure. Okay. So I have a whole other presentation on that I normally do. Yeah, agency really is this idea that students are not empty vessels and don't come to us being helpless. bodies. They have a sense, an identity, and they have a free will, and they have a voice. So in many cases, I think historically there has been this idea that, you know, the traditional idea of teaching has been, yes, I am the teacher, you are the student, I will fill you with knowledge, right? It's a very much a transmission approach. Whereas, and that doesn't always necessarily enable agency in the student, because their role is very passive there. So with the idea of agency, the idea is that they are not this helpless consumer of knowledge. They are an active participant in their learning, and that they feel empowered and enabled to participate in that. So the work of Bandura in social cognitive theory has been very influential in this idea. There's also a lot of work outside of education in the fields of philosophy and in the fields of psychology that talk about agency. The OECD also brought out a concept paper last year on the idea of agency, and they talk about a collective agency. So on one hand, for agency, it might be, let's take in a classroom, you're teaching something and a student connects to what you're saying, and they say, oh, you know, miss, you're talking about cats. I have a book on cats. Can I bring it? And can I bring my cat into school or whatever? And you say, okay, yeah, why, let's do that. And perhaps you change what you were going to do because the student showed interest or the children were taking it in a different direction. So you modifying that shows that's agentic engagement. That shows that it matters what the children and what the learners think, because they also can influence this whole learning community, right? So that it's a complex idea. I think it's not something that agency isn't something that you understand overnight. And I think it's something that I'm still understanding as well. I'm doing a lot of research about agency at the moment. But on a surface level, we're talking about things like children having voice in the classroom, so their voice being heard, choice. So choice within the curriculum, not just, okay, do you want to make a poster or do you want to make a diorama, but, really listening to children's voice and giving them choice related to that, and also enabling ownership of their learning. So we talk about voice, choice, and ownership as being very fundamental to learner agency within learning and teaching. So I don't know if that answers or begins to answer some of your questions, or maybe it creates more questions for you.
So if I can sum up the word agency, it relates to the teacher effort to facilitate the students in the classroom, isn't it?
No, it relates to a belief about learners. So it relates to the learner. So as a teacher, you also have agency, right? So everybody has that sense of power. So if you imagine yourself in a situation where you're helpless and you can't do anything, that's where your agency isn't being enabled. And if you're in a situation where you say, hang on, no, wait a minute, that's not right, I have a voice here, I like my voice to be heard, that's you expressing your agency, your sense of agency, right? So it's about ownership of learning and where the locus of power is. So it's about power, fundamentally, agency, self-power. Yeah, it's complex.
It really is. Thank you, Ms. Anita.
Yeah, maybe sometime I can join you again. I have a presentation that I do about agency where we look at various definitions. But really, agency is always contextual, right? So it depends on your own setting, even if we look at cultural histories, right? So a Western idea of agency versus a Eastern idea of agency is more individual versus collective. So even with the concept itself, culture plays such an important part. So you have to be careful with agency. We're not saying this idea of agency is better than this idea of agency. We're saying it's important to ask, where does the power reside in your learning and teaching environment? So who has the power, who controls the learning? And if you find that it's all about you, the teacher, and not about the student, then the question is, how can you give away some of that power so that the student has opportunity to own their learning, and that enables agency, rather than them just saying, well, school is about me sitting here and being told what to do. Because likely that person will go out and say, well, life is about me sitting here and being told what to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Okay, great.
Thank you, Ibu Astri, for the good
Thank you.
question.
Thanks.
Probably we will invite you sometime later, Monita, to talk
Sure.
about that in particular.
Sure. Yeah, it's a
We
very
would really love to, Miss Monita.
Yeah, it's a very interesting topic. I'm doing some research on that now. I'll share with you also a couple of recordings that I have of sessions, discussions that I've had with just different educators about this. They're all free on YouTube. So
Thank
Oh,
you.
okay, that will be
yeah,
great. Thank you.
yeah, sure.
Okay,
but
any more questions, students? We still have time, like 10 more minutes before we have the closing session. Okay. Seems that they,
lots to think about, I think, today.
yeah. It's very
Jimmy,
philosophical indeed.
One more question. Can I have one more question?
Sure.
Ms. Monita, as you said that the interdisciplinary have blurred boundaries for each concept. So from interdisciplinary point of view, what about the urgency to make students understand about the concept itself?
Yeah, I mean, I think that concepts, there are two types of concepts, right? There are concepts that are broad. So let's say a concept like connection. But then there are also related concepts that are subject specific. So if we connection, or let's talk about change, right? In mathematics, change can be how do you convert a fraction to a decimal, right? So the overarching concept is still change, and change can be looked at in mathematics, in social studies, in science. And really what we want is that students have an understanding of change. Yes, they also need to know how to convert fractions, and those are specific skills. So I think one of the criticisms really has been that a lot of people feel that it's either or. It's not either transdisciplinary or disciplinary. These two things are related. So it's about the relation. You cannot have transdiscipline without the discipline. So obviously in schools, a discipline is very large. It's a body of knowledge. In schools, we have subjects. They are curated, smaller versions of the discipline that someone somewhere has decided is important to know for that age group, right? So this is still, in schools, we still have curriculum. It's about how we present the curriculum to students so that they know that these disciplinary, that mathematics just doesn't happen in a mathematics class, that mathematics happens in life every day, all the time. So it's that idea of making that connection from what you're learning to transferring to a real world. And a lot of children, when they see that happen, they didn't realize that mathematics actually, in everyday life, we're following, we have to use maths, but we just don't call it maths, right? We call it life. So yeah, it's about how you make those authentic connections. I think that's the key. It's not about saying, okay, at the cost of not understanding how to convert a fraction. You still have to know how to do that. We have to know how to read, how to write. Otherwise, we can't inquire further into other things. So, these skills are still required. But what we're saying is learning a skill in context is going to be much more beneficial, and children are going to remember that much longer than if they just learn it in isolation, for example, like spelling. If they don't make the connection between reading, writing, and spelling and literacy, then they're not going to be able to apply that when they face a new word in the environment.
So
Okay.
if we want to,
Bu Astri, is that clear already?
Yeah, clear. So if we
Nice.
want to adapt the transdisciplinary, we just need to use a specific model of teaching, right?
Yeah, I would say that if you were looking to make your own teaching more transdisciplinary, that you start with concept-based instruction. So there's a lot of research around there. Lynn Erickson has written lots of books. There are lots of resources to support how you can take a knowledge-based curriculum, a fact-based curriculum, because facts that we learn all lead to concepts, right? So if I say, this country has this many states and this many languages and this many water bodies, I mean, there is a concept there. There is a form and a function. So you still need facts, but really in a concept-based curriculum, you don't stop at facts. You move beyond that to concepts so that you can transfer. And
Okay, thank you very much.
yeah, that's a good place to start.
Yeah, okay. I understand that. Thank you very much,
Yeah.
Pak Jimmy, Miss Monita.
Thank you for
Okay.
your questions. Yeah, good
Yeah, she
questions.
said Bu
Thank
Astri
you.
is very eager to learn more about IB and things.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, since we are running out of time, so probably we just proceed to some of the questions that I wrote in the chat room. I'm curious about that term that you mentioned earlier about specialist and generalist. So what is your idea about this in terms of the delivery in the classroom? I mean, teachers have to know, of course, the core subjects in primary level. By the way, in our department, we do have like 5 core subjects in our curriculum, which are math, Indonesian language, natural science, social science, and civics. So
Right.
how do you interpret that, and how you translate it to the delivery in the classroom? Do you mean that teachers have to be specialists sometimes, but at other times they are going to be generalists?
Yeah, that's a good question actually, because this is quite specific terminology. So when you specialize, you might be specifically, like say, a math or a drama teacher or a science specialist. And I like to think of this of, imagine you're invited to a dinner party, right? You're invited to a dinner party, you invite all the subjects into the dinner party, and mathematics is sitting there, science is sitting there. And imagine they're all trying to express their curriculum point. So they're all saying, no, this is math is the most important, or whatever, or this is the concept. Versus all of them not having that identity and all trying to solve a problem. So they're not wearing their identity, their subject hats. It doesn't mean that you're not a specialist. You do, like, I'm a language specialist. That's my area. And when I think about a problem, for me, language is my go-to, right? But when we're thinking, that's why collaboration is important, because often I may not be thinking from a mathematical point of view, which is why I need my colleague to be thinking about this concept with me, because their perspective might be a bit different. So when I talk about specialists, I talk about people who are in a school scenario that whose job it is to teach a subject, and often they teach across the grade levels, right? So for example, a PE teacher is a specialist. They teach grades 1 to 5 PE, whereas a homeroom teacher might teach math, language, social studies, science, or your 5 core subject areas, right? I mean, she or he is still a specialist in those areas for primary, but the PE teacher, for example, I would refer to him as a specialist because he teaches that subject across the curriculum, whereas a homeroom teacher tends to be more of a generalist. And what tends to happen is that teachers who are the homeroom teachers tend to control everything, because they are doing most of those core subject areas, and the PE teacher is just seeing the children for once a week.
Yeah.
But what we're saying in authentic collaboration is, you're really encouraging teachers to shed that identity just for that planning time, to really take ownership themselves and say, I'm not just a PE teacher here, I'm teaching this concept. How will I teach this concept? So that's how we make the differentiation. But yeah, those terms can be differently defined in different curriculum settings.
Okay, thank you for the answer. I still have another one actually before we end. Since we are in the primary teacher education department, what is your suggestion for our curriculum to be in line with what you're saying? I mean, is there any specific policy or designing the curriculum, redesigning the curriculum? And if yes, what is the priority for us to change?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question, because if you study change, making a change in your classroom might be fine and it'll have small effects, but real transformation has to be a whole system. right?
Mm.
So that's where the importance of policy comes in. So unless there is a policy that says, yes, we value this, we align with these beliefs, um, uh, we want to make our curriculum more connected, then it's very difficult to make individual change. So if you have the power to create your own policies within your school, I think that's a great way to start, to say, okay, this is what we have to do, and this is where we have flexibility, and what systems can we change within our school in a policy so that this whole change is supported. Once you've done that, then it becomes easier on an individual level because you're supported at a systemic level. So that would be, even if you just have, you say, okay, let's say once a year we're going to do one unit we're going to do one combined project, one transdisciplinary STEAM or STEM project with children. And that could just be a good way to start to experience it. And then as you experience it, you'll find that naturally that collaboration and those connections will begin to happen for you. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I have one last question actually here coming from the student. I will read the question from Cornelia. Okay.
Yeah.
Hello, Mrs. Monita. I have a question. I see that the IB curriculum supports meaningful learning activities. How do teachers make meaningful learning activities during this pandemic situation? I mean, online learning, because maybe we can't meet students to make learning more meaningful and fun for students. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a big challenge for teachers that you've identified there, Cordelia. Yeah, it's something that I'm talking to teachers a lot about at the moment. I think the key thing is the pedagogy does not change. Pedagogy is about the way that we learn, right?
Yeah.
So regardless of how we're learning, that commitment to social constructivism has not changed. What has changed is the environment and the resources that are available to us to do this. So it takes, first of all, a little bit of a shift of mindset. We need to upskill ourselves in looking at these new tools and platforms, right? So previously in a class, I'll say to children, okay, you've got this now, you're going to get into groups and you're going to go away and do this, and then we're going to come back together and we're going to discuss it. Now, how do I do that? So that's where you've got your tools like your Zoom breakout rooms. You've got your what they call synchronous and asynchronous learning, which basically means learning happening in real time and learning happening in your own time. And depending on the age of the children, obviously with older children, they can be more independent, but also we need to provide students with the skills and the scaffolding to become independent. We can't just say, oh, it's pandemic now, you got to learn by yourself, right? How do we know how to learn by ourselves? So I think we need to look at the skills that children need to be able to learn by themselves. We need to model those. I think there's got to be a lot of the key thing for me about the online learning is engagement, right? It's key whether you're in a classroom or not, but engagement is easier, one to gauge and one to provide a provocation when you're physically in a classroom. You've got to look at ways to provoke children's interests, because once they're interested in something, you won't stop them learning. It'll be that drive, that motivation, and that's what we talk about with ownership, right, of learning. So I'll give you an example. I have a niece who lives in England, and she was off school for a while, and her parents, asked me if I'd just help out with something for her to do. So I didn't want to make it like, okay, you're going to do school online with me. So we made some fun projects of things that she was interested in first. So I know her quite well, and I know she's interested in cats like me. So we started building these castles for our cats. One for me and one for her. But within that, we were able to integrate the things that she had at home. So we had to look at the resources that she had or had access to. And then I had to see what skills from her curriculum can I build into this. So obviously we've got all the areas of measurement. We've got all the areas, of using rulers, of measuring things, of 3D and 2D blocks, of making a plan and then making a building. And then based on that, we wrote stories. So we brought in language and literature. Okay, to write a story, we need a process. So we use something called a story mountain. And through that, she didn't feel like she was learning. She felt like she was doing a fun project with me. It was really exciting. And her mom said to me, she never writes this much, but she's been sitting in her room, writing in her diary, writing the story, making a draft, publishing it, adding photographs, because it didn't feel like schoolwork to her. So
Yeah.
that's really the key. What we have to find what children are interested and passionate about, and what they have access to. It's definitely taking different time. It's going to take more time, because we also have that foundation of right now children need that very strong emotional connection, right? They are feeding off the fear of everybody. They're hearing their parents, they're seeing the news. So I think, as one of my friends said, it's Maslow before Bloom's taxonomy. So first, if you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that lower level, that security, safety, that has to be there first with online learning. So relationship building, rapport, feeling of
Yeah.
safety, then those interests, checking into children's passions, and then using your curriculum objectives to match into their passions. For me, this has been the key for success. But I'm not teaching an online class, so I can't say I'm speaking from experience outside of this one that I had. But yeah, that would be my advice. Yeah.
Okay. It's been very great insight from you, Monita. Thank you very much. And there are still questions. They just wrote down the questions, unfortunately, last minute already. We're running out of time, but I think they can write you email, right? If you don't mind.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I might take some time to get back to you, but I will get back to you eventually. You can
Okay,
also
great.
follow me if you're on Twitter, on social media. You can follow me. I often post some things related to my research, or some interesting things I find about transdisciplinary learning. So yeah, I'm at Monita Sen on Twitter. So
Okay, great.
thank
That would be
you,
great.
all of you, for your questions. I really appreciate them. I wish I was there with you and I could see you, because I'm missing
Okay.
that rapport.
Hope to have you in Jakarta soon, yeah?
I hope so. I
Okay.
really do hope so. Okay.
So again, let's give a big of applause for Monita. Yeah,
Thank you.
online.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very much, Monita. A
Thank
wonderful
you.
experience
I
today.
feel
And
the love. I feel the love. Thank you.
yeah, okay. And it's time for us to, take picture together. Mas Widi, please turn on your camera, all of you, so we can have picture together. Bu Mel, ada yang mau disampaikan dulu, Bu Mel, sebelum kita tutup?
So we all got to do our hair now, right?
Oke, mungkin nanti ya. Oke, kita 2 kali ya, Mas Widi ya? 2 grup ya? Oke, so everybody give your best smile. Mas Widi, tolong kasih tahu.
Jadi 4 kali, Pak ya. Ini
4 times, okay, no problem.
Yang pertama ya, 1, 2, 3.
Okay, that's the first. Next.
Oke, yang kedua. 1, 2, 3.
Okay.
Yang ketiga. 1, 2, 3. Oke, yang terakhir. Oke, sudah Pak Jim.
Done? Okay,
cheeks
thank
are
you, Mas
hurting.
Widi. Again, thank you very much, Monita.
Thank you. Lovely to meet
Yeah,
you all,
looking
and
forward-
all the best. Yeah.
Yes, to seeing you in Singapore sometime.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope
Okay.
so. And all the
I'll
best
give
to
my
your
best
students.
regards to Faisal as well.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very
Goodbye.
much. See you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye. Ya, yang lainnya silakan boleh membubarkan diri. Nanti pertanyaan kalian yang belum terjawab, saya akan sampaikan lewat email ya. Mas Widi, tolong dilihat di capture ya pertanyaannya. Saya harus segera rapat lagi jam 11 di tempat lain, di Zoom yang lain. Terima kasih banyak Bapak Ibu dosen yang sudah bergabung, Prof. Sas, Bu Mel, ada Pak Freddy, ada Bu Astri, Pak Warno.
Hai Jihan.
Bu Astri keren ya. Tanyanya banyak
apa
banget,
sih?
keborong.
Ya habisnya nggak ada yang nanya.
Ya, muridnya nanyanya udah last minute baru nanya. Kebagian.
Taruh penuh.
Oke.
Aku terang banget nih ya.
Ya, Kenapa ini terang?
Aku ngadep cahaya